Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Just a couple of looks back at Weimar. You have a lot of reactionaries out there saying, oh, the United States is bankrupt, the United States is bankrupt, Greece, the United States is Greece. Yeah, bankrupt compared to what? Compared to J.P. Morgan Chase? Compared to Citibank? Those were so bankrupt that the U.S. government had to save them. And who says this? Moody's, Fitch, Standard & Poor's? Those are criminal enterprises. Those were the guys who were telling you that all the subprime derivatives were great until Lehman blew in September of 2008. So bankrupt compared to what? If you look at it in comparative terms, which is the only way you can, U.S. government not that bankrupt, actually looking pretty good compared to most of the companies that are saying this. I wonder how Koch Enterprises is doing. We have this in the Weimar Republic, the right-wingers, the right-wing opposition, and now we're looking at the Ike history of the Weimar Republic, EYCK. The rightist opposition had been doing everything in its power to shake the confidence of the German people in their government's finances. During the Reichstag debate on a certain foreign loan, the spokesman for the extreme reactionary party, the German National People's Party, mixed his metaphors to call the measure the last desperate act of a political system which has turned into a runaway pump and the panic loan of a regime that has lost its head. The slander was so severe that even the People's Party spokesman, more moderate conservative, said these extended fantasies about a coming catastrophe are a menace to the German economy. But, of course, if you keep talking about the coming catastrophe, you're helping to bring it on. And, of course, are you then in league with people who have shorted the dollar and the rest of it? And we went through this stuff about shock. Just remember now, we look at Wisconsin. Let's switch over then to Hans Mommsen's Rise and Fall of Weimar Democracy. States and municipalities in Germany in the 20s and early 30s, the states and municipalities were virtually prohibited from contracting new loans. And the result was an austerity psychosis that only further increased unemployment. Austerity measures were particularly harsh in the personnel-intensive education area, where they affected adult education, public libraries, the public school system, and last but not least, the universities. The cuts mandated in all areas, with the exception of agriculture, were drastic with respect to salaries and wages in the public sector. Not including the elimination of benefits, these cuts amounted to a 20% reduction of salaries in the public sector. And that's Germany drifting towards fascism in the late 20s and early 30s. Time to turn it around. Time to take a stand right now in Wisconsin. Now, let me then switch gears. Let's go over to Egypt. Here I call your attention to the article posted today on Tarpley.net. Why was it so important for the U.S. and the British to get Hosni Mubarak out? Well, we've said repeatedly, the main plan of the U.S. and the British over recent years in the Middle East has been to assemble that bloc of Sunni Arab states, meaning Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf Emirates, Jordan perhaps, together with the Israelis in a united front under a U.S. nuclear umbrella, and play that against Iran, Syria, Hezbollah, Hamas, and their friends. Who was opposing this? Mubarak was opposing it. Mubarak, in the summer of 2009, loudly rejected Hillary Clinton's demand that Egypt become a part of this alliance. It essentially means that you'd have a military alliance among Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Israel, just to limit it to that, although there'd be others too. A military alliance against the Iran, Syria, Hezbollah front. And Mubarak did not want it. He said, I will not normalize with the Israelis under these conditions. And this allowed then the Saudis, who are even more opposed, to also say no. So the main strategy of the U.S. and the British was being sabotaged and undercut by Mubarak. In the year 2010, the big thrust of Hillary Clinton all year was isolate Iran, cut off links between Iran and every other country. Don't let the Iranians have any friends in the world. And at the height of this agitation, in October 2010, Hosni Mubarak opens direct flights between Cairo and Tehran, direct passenger jet service for the first time in 30 years. And he comes out and says the Iranians can play a positive role. Now, from the side of Ahmadinejad, I also found some coverage in an Iranian newspaper close to the spiritual leader, right? The Ayatollah Khamenei at the head of this, who attacks Ahmadinejad for being too ready to negotiate and find ways to cooperate and converge with the moderate Arabs, right? Because what you have is the rejection front, right? The rejection front being Iran, Syria, Hezbollah. That's one side. The other side, of course, is the more moderate, somewhat more pro-Western, Egypt and Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. And what Mubarak has understood is that division reduces the Arabs and indeed the Muslims in general to a position of impotence, and it has allowed the Israelis to frankly run wild in the way that they have over the last 2 to 3 years. So Mubarak's looking for a way out of this, and he finds a partner to some degree in Ahmadinejad, who's also a general, also a military guy, both of them looking somewhat like a Nasserist revival going on in the Middle East. And, of course, it's the Ayatollahs, the mullahs in Iran, who object to what Ahmadinejad is doing. Ahmadinejad basically says, your sectarian foreign policy is sterile, and it's reduced us to this terrible situation. Let's find ways to be conciliatory and make that united front. I think this was the spirit of Ahmadinejad's trip to Lebanon last year. The other one, of course, is Lebanon and this United Nations kangaroo court to indict Hezbollah, where Mubarak comes forward and says we cannot have the future of Lebanon being held hostage to some verdict delivered by a foreign supranational commission. And again, the Iranians can play a constructive role. So this is all pure heresy. This is the diametrical 180-degree opposite of what the U.S. wanted. And it goes back further. It goes back to the fact that Mubarak refused to send troops to Iraq in 2003. Mubarak has always refused to send troops to Afghanistan. Mubarak has always strictly kept U.S. bases out of Egypt. There are no U.S. military bases in Egypt. There is a contingent of about 500 U.S. personnel that are part of the Sinai Monitoring Force, which is simply a kind of a observation and tripwire function under the Camp David Accords, but they have no independent mission. They're strictly defined in what they can do, although I'm sure they play around, but it's 500 people, and that's it. So this is not the puppet that some people have described. And if you look at it, he also, in terms of recent critiques, he said that after the Israeli-Lebanon war of the summer of 2006, Israeli invasion of Lebanon, Mubarak was trying to mediate a peace settlement, and he said Bush and Cheney are sabotaging my attempts to bring the Syrians together and the Lebanese Hezbollah together with the Israelis. And he also goes on to cross the U.S. in many, many other ways. Now, I've also got in the article a compendium of the threats to the Suez Canal. The strike by the employees of the Suez Canal puffed up in the Israeli and other Western press. The canal is in danger. The blowing up of the pipeline that takes natural gas out of Egypt into Israel and then on into Jordan. This is obviously also a part of this scenario. And immediately the cry is raised, Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda. You can imagine the headline, Obama orders Marines to seize Suez Canal to protect world's most important waterway from Al-Qaeda. You've also got then constant reports from the Israelis that Hamas gunmen joined by Jaish al-Islami, Islamic Army, Al-Qaeda forces are now all over the Sinai Peninsula. Who knows whether this is true? And so forth. So you get the entire rundown on this at Tarpley.net. So do keep up with me at Webster G. Tarpley, Webster Tarpley on Twitter. Look at Tarpley.net. And we will see you next week.